One of the benefits that I found in some 23 years of attending Toastmaster meetings is being able to listen to my fellow members share their stories, their life adventures, and their speeches. I get to travel the world, I get to learn about things that I really don't know anything about, and I get to learn them vicariously through my fellow members' stories. Some of them were exciting, they were riveting, some of them had an important message that went with it. Some of them, there was a lesson involved with the story. Some of them seem kind of pointless, I'll have to tell you that. Some stories seem pointless. But then there's some stories that will stick with you for the rest of your life. What I'd like to do this evening is share 3 fairly quick stories of stories that I've heard here at Toastmasters from my fellow members delivering speeches. And the theme, of course, is, so you think you're having a bad day, just keep these in mind that, things could be a lot worse for you. I'd like to start off by sharing a story of a fellow member. His name was Wally. Now, Wally was a journalist by trade. That was his profession. So he could craft a good story. And he would come and he would share stories with us at every Toastmaster meeting that he was giving a speech. He's somewhat of an adventurer, I guess you would say. He was athletic when he was younger. He shared a story about how he ran the Boston Marathon on 2 different occasions. And I think he also shared a story about running the Hawaii Marathon, probably in the same speech. But he also did some other adventurous stories, and each one he told was more incredulous than the other one. He was telling us one story about camping in the Himalayas, basically at the base of Mount Everest. Now, who would want to do something like that? That's definitely not my idea of what an adventure or a holiday would be. But he told us a story about that, and it was really exciting. And I was really impressed with it. Then he told us another story. This one I couldn't believe at first, but then he said it was true. He told us a story about running with the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. Anybody ever been to Spain, running with the bulls? You ever heard of it? The idea is, you don't run with the bulls. The idea is to run just ahead of the bulls. Because if they catch up to you, you've got big problems. You're in trouble. They'll run you over, they'll gore you. He not only did it once, but he did it on 2 different occasions. And I believed him because he was a runner. But then he told another story that certainly resonated with me, and I remembered, I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. He was telling a story of one of these vacations that he went on. He went to Papua New Guinea for vacation. Now, I've basically seen it on National Geographic, so I don't know a lot about it. But he wanted to do a rough vacation. There wasn't a Holiday Inn that he could stay at. There wasn't, a Days Inn or a place you could rest or anything like that. He wanted to go right and spend time with the citizens, the population, the Aboriginal people, the natives of Papua New Guinea. So he stayed in a village. Now, this was a village that there was no Holiday Inn, there was no Days Inn, anything like that. So he stayed with the citizens. He stayed in, their lodgings. There was no running water. They had to use a communal well. That's where they got their water from. And they had what's called a communal latrine. Now these are somewhat bush people still, even today. Well, this was probably 20 years ago that he did this. But even then, they were still not the way we would describe a population as being civilized. So the latrine was a pit that was dug. It was a trench. And what you have was, there was a log that transversed one side of the latrine, the pit, over to the other side of the pit. So I won't demonstrate it. It's all women here, just me. I'm not going to demonstrate it. But what you'd have to do is you'd sit on the log and you'd do your business, and then you'd carry on. That's what the theory was. But what happened the particular day that Wally was on it, guess what happened? The log broke. Now think about gravity. Think about Isaac Newton, what he told us when that apple fell. If a force goes down, it fell. Wally fell into the pit. He fell into the latrine. Yes, it was. So you think you're having a bad day. Just think about the day that Wally had. It was a bad day for him. he was able to get himself out, clawed out. I guess they helped him get out of this pit, this latrine. Did I mention that there was no running water? So there was no showers. So he had to go to a local river, clean himself off. And it was probably, at this point he described as probably, I can't imagine it being anything worse unless the bulls had caught him. This would have been the worst day of his life. But a funny thing happened. When he got into the village, everybody was patting him on the back. And they were cheering him. He didn't know why, but he finally figured out that it was kind of a rite of passage. It was so common to use the latrine, and it was so common that the log would break that everybody fell in. So he became one of the village people. That's a whole different story. Not sure which one he would have been, the latrine singer, I guess. But he fell into the pit, and they commended him for that. So it was no stigma that went with it. It was just a rite of passage. So if you think you're having a bad day, just, things could be a lot worse. Just think of that pit. Another Toastmaster speech that I heard, and I'm thinking that it was a contest, but I can't see this story being considered a humorous contest, because the woman sharing it was, I wouldn't say she was devastated, but she took us back to a time when she was 7 years old. Now, does anybody know what an outhouse is? Mm-hmm. A biffy, some people would call it that. In my family, I was from cottage country, and my grandparents had a cottage, and the outhouse was called the Ken Rae Villa. My father's name was Ken Rae Stonehouse. I'm named after my father, as far as I know. I'm not sure if I'm named after my father or the outhouse. But she told us, and I can resonate with this story. She was telling us that when she was 7 years old, she was at her cottage. She was probably in her 40s at the time she was telling the story. She was at her cottage, and she had to use the outhouse. Now, when you think of outhouse, does it bring back a certain image in your mind? They're usually dirty. Well, they do smell, yes. And you're worried about what's hiding underneath the seat. They bring black widows. You ever heard of them? That was what my fears were, and they still are. Well, she was 7 years old. Worst case scenario that you could possibly think of. The floor caved away. The floor caved away, and she was kind of like the Johnny Cash. She went down, down, down to the burning ring of fire. But it wasn't a ring of fire she fell into. It was the pit of doom. She was down there, and I cringe even thinking about this. She was down there for a good 8 hours. Nobody knew, their family didn't know she was missing. They were looking for her. She's sharing this story with us at a Toastmaster speech. And of course it brings back all the fears that you have in your own life as a childhood. And she was able to put a good spin on it somehow. I don't know. She survived. She was able to tell the story. But it brought back memories. So when I think of, it was bad enough what Wally experienced, but Wally was an adult. But look at Holly. She was 7 years old. How would that scar you for the rest of your life? Mm-hmm. Or, if you're an optimist, life has to be better after something like that. Another story I want to share with you, and I don't have a theme going here. No more latrine stories. This is about a fellow Toastmaster friend of mine. His name was Fred. Now, Fred is a German fellow. He's probably at the time, well, he's still 15 years older than me, because we kept even with each other, but it was like 15 years ago, so he's still 15 years ahead of me. But he was sharing a story at a Toastmaster meeting of a situation that happened to him. And try to put yourself into this situation if you can. I can't. It probably brings up nightmares for me. And it's not a latrine story. Fred is German. In the 60s, him and a friend, when they were teenagers, came over to North America for the first time. And they were touring, going through Mexico. Once they got over here, they had bought themselves a Volkswagen van. Back in the 60s, people had Volkswagen vans, hippies. I don't think they were hippies, but they were trying to travel across North America in their van. And they started off in Mexico. I've never been to Mexico. Anybody been to Mexico before? Is it hot down there? Is it hot at nighttime sometimes? Fred said it was really hot. They got into a practice of pitching their tent outside of town, pitching their tent, taking off all their clothes and sleeping in the nude. So I'm not trying to give you that image because you haven't met Fred, but him and his friend, that's what they would do. And it was all worked out well. You know, sometimes plans go well, sometimes plans don't go well. They woke up one morning, and can you imagine what happened? What the next step was? Their van was gone. Somebody stole their van. Not only did they steal their van, they stole the tent that they were under. It was one of those tents that was just like a pup tent, there was no floor to it. So they stole the tent that they were sleeping in. So they're lying in a plain area, an open area, naked. There's no tent. Their van is gone. Their money is gone. Their wallets, because they were in the van in a safe place. Their identification is gone. No. And did I mention what country he was from?
Germany.
What language do you speak in Germany?
German.
What language do they speak in Mexico?
Spanish.
Yeah, it's not Mexican. I used to fall for that one. They didn't speak Spanish. So they had to get up from where they were, and they had to go into the nearest town, buff naked, no money, no identification, no common language, and look for the authorities to tell them their hard luck story. So when I think of situations that we go in through life that you think, this has to be the worst day in my life, I think it's important to reframe. No, this isn't the worst day in your life. You're going to have a lot worse days. Most cases we all survive them. But I think it's important that we actually actively reframe what goes into our mind. Our mind believes what we tell it. If we think we're going to have a lousy day, guess what's going to happen? We're going to have a lousy day. If we're going to something and we set out, we say we're going to have fun, odds are we're going to have fun because we are receptive to that. So if you're having a bad day and you think, could things possibly get any worse? Yes, they could get worse. You could be like Wally. Well, falling off the log is certainly a different experience. Falling off the log into a latrine, that would be a pretty rough day. But it could be a lot worse. Look at Holly. She had a worse day. But she survived. And she was able to tell people about it. And she was laughing. I don't know, she was probably not laughing at the time. So you think you're having a bad day? Think back to Fred. At least we have the ability to wear clothes. We're not going to have them stolen from us. We all share a common language. That would certainly be challenging, walking naked into a police department. I can't imagine doing that at all. So you think you're having a bad day? Just think. It could be a lot worse. But then think, maybe, just maybe, you could be having a future story that you're going to be able to share here at a Toastmasters meeting. And I look forward to that day, not when you have such a bad experience, but when you get to share your story. Thanks everyone for listening to my story. Madam Chair.